Welcome back to BLOCKTV. It's time now for chain breakers. In a case that continues to rock the crypto sphere for its scale and sheer audacity, approximately $2.9 billion in deposits have been lost in an alleged scam with the cryptocurrency wallet provider and exchange PlusToken. With 6 Chinese nationals under arrest in Vanuatu and the main architects of the scheme still on the run, there's still so much to break down about this case. Fortunately, we have with us, joining us from Guangzhou, China, Dovey Wan, founding partner at Primitive Ventures and expert on China's crypto space. Dovey, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, guys.
Absolute pleasure. Now, to start things off, I just want to know your latest take on some of the updates and the most recent developments in this PlusToken case. So many layers to unpack and unfold, but I understand you've got some of the latest information going around. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so basically it's actually to my surprise that the entire Western crypto community and actually have no prior exposure or visibility of this gigantic scam at all. And I think primarily due to the PlusToken, so they're typical targeted victims are not are basically not typical crypto people. And so they're aiming to scam average citizens citizens from tier 4, 3, 5 cities here from China and or in Korea and Japan and the other areas in Southeast Asia. And what we have noticed, and so they have been constantly have this tutorial and teaching users and teaching users that never be in touch with Bitcoin or crypto before, and then basically teach them how to buy Bitcoin and then later deposit Bitcoin to to the PlusToken wallet. And so I think that's why if you are just an average user, so if you're an active user on Twitter, crypto Twitter, or especially the Western crypto community, and so you would never heard about it. And so the whole thing actually broke here in mainland China. So that's about I would say about 1.5 months ago. And so that is at around late June. And so most of this PlusToken wallet, and so they're basically unfunctional and people cannot withdraw. And so that's when the whole thing completely just melted down. And then a week later, so that's in about early July. And so we got the official Chinese police announcement saying some of these PlusToken related criminals has been arrested in Vanuatu, and then so some of these key players, and so they're they are still on the round. And then so one thing that I want to note in the Chinese police report is that so they have been just emphasizing on how complicated the whole cases is, because it's a global, so it's a global coordination and a global scheme of the scam. And then so they have no idea, and then so who's actually in control of the wallet. So basically the whole fund movement right now is actually unclear. And then just after I broke this on Twitter, and then so I've got a lot of messages and saying, just basically coming from all the victims. And so it seems it's not just in Asia, the victims are not just in Asia. And I think the scale is much larger than we have been expecting, because many of them are coming from either Germany, Russia, and then Ukraine, etc. So which means there's a lot of large network of large network of these scammers. And because PlusToken is I would consider it's a 100x Bitcoin app basically. And then they always have this local local group organization, just a local scam group owner. And then so all these local point of contact, and then so they will develop their own down the stream basically victims. So it's a typical typical scale of this Ponzi scheme, but it's a global scale Ponzi scheme, so that we have seen. So it might be the largest one.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is quite large, but it's also interesting to note how long it's been known about, because PlusToken started operating in early 2018, but already by September of 2018, there were concerns about the scheme, some saying that this is a Ponzi, that there is sort of elements here that don't seem to be adding up, and speak of manipulation. It's amazing sort of the time it took from September of 2018 up until now, when the action sort of finally took place, with the coin's value peaking, as you've stated in some of your notes, at $340. It's pretty staggering the scale it was able to get to. How do you think this was possible?
I think so. So to be honest, and so like one thing I think like PlusToken has been doing really well is they have a very sophisticated like educational effort. Like basically they have been making the Wallet app like extremely usable, and just like average people can actually just like know how to use the wallet like instantly. And then so I think the most active time period, so that's between about March to July. So that's about early March to like early July. And then so that's the most active period. And so like I think like the whole team, and so like because as far as we know, like the whole team is like the serial scammers, and then so this is actually not their like first scam, and like the core team members, so they have been doing many other scams before, and then so like that's why one of this one of the founding team members, so they're actually on the Chinese police list, like just at the watch list for quite a long time. And so like from what I have heard is, and then so there are many like PlusToken mutations out there, and then so that's actually operating right now by some of these PlusToken branches. And so that's one thing I cannot confirm, but like just like by I think just simply by looking at things like Cloud Token, and there's like a few other, and just simply by looking at their like website, like white paper, etc. So it's exactly just like the PlusToken, like the copycat. And so they basically all promise like very high yield investment on like monthly basis, like anywhere from like 10 to 20% like every month. And then like after that, and then so they will also like one thing they have been doing really well is, like instead of like pay you out with Bitcoin or like Ethereum, and then so they will actually pay you out with their own shitcoin. And so for the case for PlusToken is like they have their own shitcoin as Plus, and that is their quote unquote like exchange token or like wallet token, right? And then so they will basically pay you out with their own shitcoin, and then on the other hand, because like all the shitcoin has been listed on many these like secondary unknown Chinese exchanges, and then so they can easily pump the shitcoin as well. And so like once they pump the shitcoin, and then so it will further FOMO many of these like wallet users, and then so in exchange their Bitcoin to the shitcoin. And so I think that is like one of their Ponzi designs so that we have seen, and then right now it has been used in many other schemes as well.
And now, I mean, now we're seeing the scheme be sort of prosecuted. We're seeing the Chinese authorities take some serious action on the matter, and we've seen, of course, that liquidation of a vast amount of the assets, which some say was the cause for the last major drop we saw in the crypto markets, Bitcoin in particular. Do you think that that's the case? I mean, the scale is there, but do you think the liquidation of some of these assets into fiat is causing problems with the crypto markets as a whole?
So I think when we talk about price action, right? So like price action, price action is the movement of a lot of like different signal, right? And so like because most of the fund out there, so there's a lot of like unspent fund. Like basically funds has been moving, like has been breaking down into smaller pieces, and then so like now we have a lot of like security firms and independent organization and like players has been tracking all these addresses, and so only a small portion has been moving into exchanges, and so we still have seen majority of the scam funds out there, and so they're like either being mixing or or like basically just like sitting there. So like basically just like sitting there and waiting to be operated. And so like, because if you think from like the scammer's perspective, right? And so assuming like the core team members, there are some core team member, like they're still on the round. So like I think like that's why the private key hasn't been seized yet. And so that's why we can see all the funds has been actively moved in like last few days, right? And I'm not sure so I have no idea whether it's like the primary reason that why we have seen the dump in like early July, but I think it will create constant sell pressure over time, like because like we are like talking about over like 10,000 Bitcoin, right? So over 10,000, Bitcoin and like over 80,000 Ethereum, and so like that's like huge number. And so it is very hard for me to believe that like the criminals and like scammers, and so they'll be easy just like sitting there and just like holding on to like those assets. So there was, I think I did it. So like at the end of the day, so they will still be cashing out, but like they will be cashing out in like a smaller amount, like bit by bit. And so like that's why I think there's a constant sell pressure from like that direction. But like the price movement is just like complicated. So there are a lot of a signal just like working onto different, just like a lot of signals and like different forces and working into each other. And so I think like the sell pressure might be even out by other buy pressure as well. And so it's very hard to tell where like the price gonna move like eventually. But I think it's definitely worth paying attention. So if you are tracking, if you are tracking supply and demand of the market.
Yeah, certainly. It'll be interesting to watch how that does play out over time. As you say, there's a lot to move and it could keep that sell pressure on for a while. But I now want to move on to a different topic that perhaps hopefully could create a little more positive and constructive developments in the sphere. Of course, I'm talking about the brand new announcement, the breaking news of Binance's new project Venus. An interesting announcement that they've just come out with. You recently tweeted about this in an interesting thread you tweeted out just a few hours ago. Project Venus being a new open blockchain project aimed, as they say, an initiative to develop localized stablecoins and digital assets pegged to fiat currencies across the globe. Dovey, a brand new announcement. What's your hot take? What do you think about all this?
So one thing that's very interesting, and I think the Binance, so their English version announcement came probably 1 hour after their Chinese announcement.
Yeah, I saw you notice that in your thread. I mean, do you think there's something a little interesting about that those two events not occurring at the exact same time? As you noted, perhaps an arbitrage opportunity across languages?
So I think there's definitely arbitrage opportunity, and because it's not just Binance has been doing that, and all these Chinese exchanges has been doing that, and then so Huobi, mostly have their Chinese, announcement ahead of the English or the other language version. I think that's primarily the reason is most of their communication staff and just PR staff, and so they're primarily Chinese, and so it's easier to write the announcement first in Chinese. And if you know how to read both Chinese and if you know how to read Chinese and English, and there's actually quite a significant differences, I would say, of the undertone of both announcement. And I think the Chinese announcement is more I would say it's more dramatic. So it actually has a lot of descriptive languages on how we want to use Binance Chain, and then to fight the fiat hegemony, things like that. And then so how we can help the sovereign state with weaker fiat power, and then to regain the power, things like that. And I think they don't have that narrative in their English version. That's very interesting. And then so second thing is, because I'm in a lot of these chat groups, just WeChat chat group, and so the Binance co-founder, one of the Binance co-founders and their current chief marketing officer, CMO, and Yihe. And so Yihe basically mentioned one thing in one of this chat group, like after she posted that Chinese announcement. And so she was like, this is the One Belt, One Road version Libra. And I'm not sure your audience know what's One Belt, One Road initiative by the Chinese governments. And basically is a initiative of the Chinese government try to ally with basically some of these smaller sovereign states and from like Middle East and then like all the way to Turkey and then to Iran and like things like that. And so I think like what she said is basically Binance wants to wants to have a secondary union so of like many of their like regulatory network and then so things like Malta and then Malta and like the other smaller African the other smaller African countries like that have been working with, and then so like basically use the Binance chain as the technical backbone, and then so help them to issue their own like digital fiat. And so I personally consider that's a very bullish that's a very bullish take for the whole Binance chain, because at the end of the day, so if you are a public chain, and then so if you are a exchange back public chain, and then so you want to get some very premium asset on top of that, and then so like at least for now, I think the fiat currency is comparing with many other, I think comparing with many other like private issue asset, so fiat currency is still considered as one of these like premium asset. So I think what Binance trying to do here is trying to align with their secondary sovereign state friends, and then issue their own digital fiat on like Binance chain, and then so that can try to boost the liquidity of that can try to boost the liquidity of Binance chain, and then also drive the adoption. So that's definitely a very bullish direction. But like how to actually implement it, and then especially for this like very complex regulatory landscape, I think that remains to be seen.
I mean, that is an incredibly bullish statement. I would agree definitely with what you're saying there, Dovey. I mean, interesting to see this desire to pull in so many new actors into the digital economy, a very powerful move for Binance to sort of co-opt a lot of those markets. But I suppose I wonder how this, if it does at all, relate in any way to the People's Bank of China's recent announcement that they're working on their own national cryptocurrency as something that they say is ready to launch. When that will happen, we're still yet to hear a sort of permanent time frame. But do you think that the moves by the Chinese government to get into the digital asset space has any impact on Binance's plans to try and co-opt this into new markets?
So like first of all, I want to point out that the Binance. As far as we can see from like the announcement itself, Binance is not going to be one coin. So it is not like Libra, like we have only one Libra coin, right? And so like Binance not gonna be like a one coin. Like Binance gonna be the code name of the project. It seems like so it's just the code name, and like on the Binance and like my suspicion is that there might be a lot of this regional localized digital fiat. And so it might not be just a one coin rules all like type of like play. And so that's one thing I want to like clarify there, like if you just do the whole announcement. And so like the Binance take is, okay, because we have this whole technical infrastructure, because we have this, compliance network and just a regulatory know-how, and especially in this tier 2, 3, 4 like sovereign states, and so we can simply help those sovereign players and then so to launch their own digital fiat, right? So and then so how does it relate to the PBOC digital renminbi or like and I think these two things they're like independent, so they're like parallel. And China nowadays is the second biggest economy in the world, and then like the digital renminbi has been has been under the radar for like many years, but I think like the progress there is actually pretty amazing. And like PBOC has been working on this at least for like 4 years now, at least for 4 years, because I remember like that's in probably early 2015 when like the former chairman of PBOC, Xiao Chanzhou, and like mentioned that we have to actually working on our own like digital currency, like digital renminbi. And so I suspect the digital renminbi will not launch soon, and so they might have a lot of like smaller child, and like especially in like area like Shenzhen or like the other like special economic zone. And like the reason being is, if you think about what is like a digital fiat, like digital fiat is basically M0, and at least that's what the digital renminbi gonna be, right? And so China nowadays, like the fiat power, so it's actually not so like PBOC does not have the full control of the power of the renminbi, because PBOC has the visibility and control over M0, but like it has no full control over M2. Like M2 is largely issued by all these commercial banks, and then. But like all the commercial banks, because if you know how the Chinese business work is, many of these big commercial banks, they are actually existing. So they're actually backed by the existing power of like many of these like high governors, like princely class, I would say, right? And so like if PBOC wants to launch the M0 entirely, and so they will actually ease off like many others launch as well. And so I think like there will be a power struggle just within this fiat business and of the existing power versus like the PBOC, because like right now the shadow banking business and contribute over 30% of the China M2 supply. So that's huge. And so I think if like PBOC wants to launch like the digital renminbi 100%, and so that can largely impact like all this shadow banking business, and then so that's a major profit center. So for like many of these commercial banks, and so I think the fight gonna continue for like quite a bit. And so from what I have heard is they will have some so they will have some experiment and just some basically regional trial, and so probably in the area like Shenzhen, and then so like to basically try to see how things go, and then also like just huge many of these like giant digital payment player like Tencent and like Alibaba, and so they're also working with PBOC on the payment layer as well. And because like here in China, like the payment infrastructure, the digital payment infrastructure is extremely advanced, and so the digital renminbi. So the digital renminbi can be seamless. So basically can easily integrate it with the existing like payment. So with the existing payment system here, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see. As you say, China is so set up in a unique position with its digital payment structures to integrate this in fascinating ways. It'll be interesting to see how it does pan out. But I want to thank you, Dovey Wan, for giving us that taste of an inside look of what's happening in a range of different critical topics coming out of China at the moment. So much happening in that space, so much still to watch. Dovey Wan, founding partner at Primitive Ventures, thank you so much for joining us here at BLOCKTV, and stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news, information, and the best analysis. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.